Lyanna Stark is one of the most important characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, and many years after her death at the Tower of Joy, she still haunts the narrative. It influences characters and their decisions. This is primarily evident with the character of Robert Baratheon, who was obsessed with the younger sister of his best friend Eddard Stark. In every instance that he talks about her, he makes it seem like Lyanna was the love of his life, and that they were meant to be together, like some fairy tale romance. Until Rhaegar came along, stole her away, and killed her, taking her away from him forever. Though we know from the show, as the books are still unclear and have yet to reach this point yet, that Lyanna loved Rhaegar, and Robert never measured up. Through characters like Ned in the books, we know that Robert never really knew who Lyanna was as a person. He was just in love with the idea. But still, it's clear that Robert believes that Lyanna was the greatest loss of his life. That overthrowing the Targaryens, taking the Iron Throne, and marrying into the wealthiest family in the realm was all pointless without her. And that his life would have been a lot better if she were still alive and in it. So, how could the story change if that were the case? What would happen if sometime before the rebellion, Robert was allowed to marry the girl of his dreams? Let's find out. Our story takes place in the early years of Thrones, before the rise of the rebellion and the fall of Mad King Aerys. Eager to bind their families in blood and hopelessly infatuated with the sister of his best friend, the young Lord of Storm's End, Robert Baratheon, makes an offer for Lyanna Stark's hand in marriage. Lord Rhaegar Stark is still alive at this point, and accepts the noble offer from Ned's best friend, to the displeasure of his only daughter. In those early years, Lyanna wasn't a big fan of the idea of marrying Robert. At this point, Robert was known for sleeping around and already had a bastard child in the Vale, a daughter named Maya. So the fear of infidelity put her off to the idea of marrying Robert Baratheon. Ned tried to reassure her that he would be loyal to her once they were married, and at that point, what he did before wouldn't matter. But Lyanna wasn't too sure, stating that love can't change a man's nature. After the engagement is made, the Starks and Baratheons begin discussing dates and making moves to see the marriage done as quickly as possible. And in this timeline, instead of putting it off for a few years, Robert and Lyanna are wed a little time before the tourney of Harrenhal happens. Robert is overjoyed with finally having the woman of his dreams, while Lyanna is less than thrilled to be with Robert. But she goes along with it for the sake of her duty. In the early parts of their marriage, Robert would not be a bad husband to Lyanna, like he was for his wife Cersei. A lot went into that failed relationship. Robert never loved Cersei, and after over a decade, he still felt robbed of his happy life with Lyanna, who, by his own words, meant everything to him. So connecting with her was difficult, if not borderline impossible. It also doesn't help that in the early years of their marriage, Robert and Cersei had to deal with the death of a child, a black-haired son they kept secret from the realm, who surprisingly was only present in the show. This black-haired prince didn't exist in the books, but I digress. There was a lot going against Cersei and Robert. Outside of anger, there was that grief. But Robert and Lyanna would be different. Despite Lyanna being less than enthusiastic about marrying Robert, the two of them would get along well enough. Robert wouldn't be a raging drunk with her at his side, and he wouldn't hit her when he got angry like he did Cersei. Nor would Lyanna provoke him in his anger on purpose like his wife Cersei did in canon. Robert would treat Lyanna with the utmost respect as his lady wife, and do his best to make her feel at home at Storm's End with him. It would be an adjustment for Lyanna, trading the ice of the north for the rains of the Stormlands, but she'd get used to it quick enough. And there will be things for her to do there too. She won't be bored. Lyanna has always been a bit of a tomboy, so I think that she'd find some fun being able to ride and possibly race horses with her husband Robert, and go on hunts with him as well. Robert would be more than thrilled to go hunting with Lyanna, I'm certain of it. There would be some level of happiness in this marriage, and sooner or later, Robert would start trying to have kids with Lyanna, so he could sire an heir to Storm's End and truly submit the Baratheon-Stark alliance in blood. But when moments like these come up, I believe that from what we know about Lyanna, she would actually brush him off at times, and avoid sleeping with him as much as she could. She wouldn't make it obvious that it's because she's not really interested in him in any way, and will make up excuses to somehow get out of it. And like their wedding night, when she does decide to lie with Robert, it's mainly out of duty instead of interest or enjoyment. and there would be some issues that would eventually arise between the couple as a result of this. While Robert is fascinated by Lyanna, a point is made in the books that he never really knew her, and that their love was one-sided. Eventually, it would get to a point that while on some level you could say Lyanna can enjoy Robert's company, it's not the same way he enjoys hers. The emotions he feels are not reciprocated. There's something stopping Lyanna from really committing to the relationship with Robert and connecting with him. As we know, one of Lyanna's main fears in the books was that Robert wouldn't be faithful to her if they got married. At some point, I believe that this would definitely be a topic of discussion for the two of them once they get comfortable enough with each other. Robert, I believe, will do his best to stay true to Lyanna and not cheat, but upon noticing that despite his efforts, she still doesn't return the same love for him, this could cause him to slip back into his old ways, which I honestly think would have just been a matter of time for Robert, even if he and Lyanna did love each other in this timeline. One woman never seemed like enough for Robert, if I'm being honest, even before his marriage to Cersei. After all, he still slept around even when he was betrothed to Lyanna. But moving on. Unlike Peter Baelish, part of me doesn't believe that Robert would be as willfully ignorant at the state of his relationship with Lyanna. Littlefinger was obsessed with Catelyn Tully, in much the same way that Robert was with Lyanna, but he deluded himself into believing that Catelyn loved him back. This was the same for Canon Robert, as he believed that they were meant for each other. But here, I find it doubtful that in the long term, Robert wouldn't be able to notice how Lyanna mostly seems to tolerate him and his affections moving forward. And because of that, the fog of the relationship slowly begins to fade for him. He won't revert to hating Lyanna or completely neglecting her because he still cares for her, far more than he ever did Cersei in canon. And I think at this point, he would still be convinced that there is love in their relationship, but how much love is what he begins to question. He would hope that he can make the state of things better. This would be something that Robert thinks on, as he divides his time between the Stormlands and the Vale. Around the time of his marriage, and sometime after that, he's actually still a ward of Jon Arryn, like he was in canon, so every waking moment wouldn't be spent with his new wife. And while he notices the small divisions in their relationship, it's those moments away from Lyanna that kind of distract Robert from those faults, and he can delude himself into thinking that things are fine and that they'll get better eventually. And even when he does doubt himself and the relationship, when he sees his friend Ned with Jon Arryn, it would give Robert hope that maybe his wife's brother would know something to make her happy and more content with the relationship and make it work a bit better for them. But in reality, there really isn't much that Ned could say to Robert at this point to make things better, except for him to give it more time and that eventually Lyanna will come around to him if he does right by her. Robert is still concerned about things though. But eventually, it seems like things could potentially pick up between the two of them, as later on, when Robert returns to Storm's End, he learns that Lyanna is pregnant with their first child. This is something that overjoys Lord Baratheon, who thinks that this will finally bring him and Lyanna closer. Eventually, Lyanna will give birth to a strong young boy, who will later be named Steffon Baratheon, in honor of Robert's deceased father. The two of them would take well to being parents. Robert would adore his son with the woman he loves. It wouldn't be like Joffrey, Tommen, or Marcella, as he would actually care for Steffon a bit more, and he doesn't despise their mother. And Lyanna would love Steffon, even though the same can't be said for his father. Still, in spite of this lack of love, the two of them manage to get along, even if the deeper emotions of this match are still one-sided and unlikely to change. Eventually, though, there would be a rock thrown into things, and in the grand form of Prince Rhaegar at that, who I still believe will be a problem when it comes to the relationship of Robert and Lyanna. You might question if that would really be the case with them married now, and I would genuinely say yes, because in canon, Rhaegar was more than willing to pursue a woman who was promised to someone else already, while he himself was in a committed marriage as well. In Rhaegar's mind, he's trying to fulfill a prophecy that will save the world, and in light of that, stepping on some toes seems like the least of his problems when it comes to the Song of Ice and Fire. So just because Lyanna and Robert's marital status has changed, Rhaegar's designs on the future would not. So I would say that he still makes a move on her, naming her Queen of Love and Beauty at Harrenhal, and then trying to convince her to run away with him the next year when they see each other again. But this is something that I see going differently. In another scenario, I could definitely see Lyanna still running off with Rhaegar despite being married to Robert now. Either way, married or betrothed, she still doesn't love him, and 9 times out of 10 would prefer the beloved Dragon Prince to the Storm Lord, something that would also be the same here. But what holds her back from pursuing Rhaegar isn't some attachment to Robert, but her new son, Steffon. In canon, Lyanna didn't seem to care too much about leaving her family behind. Assuming the show is right and she did fall in love with Rhaegar and left with him willingly, she didn't seem too worried about disappearing and leaving them to wonder about her fate. Sure, you could argue that maybe she was planning to come back eventually, and let her safety be known once she gave birth to Rhaegar's child, and Rhaegar deposed his mad father Aerys. But even then, she still didn't seem concerned about the people in her life wondering if she was alive or not. I believe having a child with Robert would change this. Abandoning her child, even for a finite amount of time, and leaving him at the mercy of his father whom she tolerates at most, may not seem the most appealing to her. Then if Rhaegar's plan does end up working, they get married, he takes the throne, she becomes queen, this could lead to a strained relationship with her son in the future, once he's old enough to understand all the details about how she abandoned their family. Things would be a bit more personal in my opinion for her, and I would actually say that with the birth of her son, Lyanna actually turns Rhaegar down here, choosing duty over love this time. And assuming that the TV show had the right of things, if Rhaegar was really in love with Lyanna, I don't think he'd take her by force once he's turned down. He'll let her go home to live her life with her husband Robert and their family. This leaves things in a very interesting position when it comes to Rhaegar, as he now has to pivot. The whole reason he went after Lyanna was to fulfill the prophecy. He wanted 3 kids to recreate the Targaryen Trinity, and with the Song of Ice and Fire floating on his mind, Lyanna Stark of Winterfell seemed like the perfect fit to do this. But if she's gone, it seems impossible to know who else he could go after in this timeline if he wanted to fulfill the prophecy and give the dragon 3 heads. Rhaegar might have to put his hopes back onto his wife Elia to have a 3rd child, even though a 3rd pregnancy might very well kill her. It's one of his only options. Unless he pursued someone like Cersei in this timeline, who is of a similar age to Lyanna and utterly fascinated with Rhaegar, even years after his death, kinda like Robert was when it came to Lyanna. But at this point, she, nor any other woman, have a valid reason to even be on the prince's radar. So his plans for his children have to be put on hold. Though in this instance, I believe that Rhaegar, even without the last child, will move to overthrow his father, King Aerys, like he seemingly planned to do in the books. I don't imagine that it would be a full-blown war when this happens, but more of an inside job, a hostile takeover, and a skirmish inside the Red Keep to see King Aerys chained and imprisoned, and his son on the Iron Throne. There would be little opposition from the Kingsguard in my opinion if this were to occur, because most of them seem fiercely loyal to Prince Rhaegar, like Gerald Hightower, Arthur Dayne, Barristan Selmy, Oswell Went, and even a young Jaime Lannister. In this timeline, Rhaegar would take the throne, and there would even be whispers about the realm once this happens. Cruel as Aerys was, many would wonder if this was just a power play by the prince to assume control. But whatever the reason was, Aerys wasn't loved or even liked enough for any of the kingdoms, lords, or common people to try and free him. So Rhaegar's reign goes mostly unopposed. Elia and her children will survive, having not been killed by Tywin's men. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower, and the other members of the Kingsguard will remain alive without the rebellion. And Jaime never has his name tarnished for killing the Mad King. Brandon and his father Rickard will have lived in this timeline since Lyanna wasn't taken, and they never tried getting her back. So Brandon remains Lord of Winterfell and gets to marry Catelyn Tully. Ned remains the second son of Winterfell though, and his future is left open-ended as a result. Daenerys, however, is also never going to be born in this timeline, since her birth was a direct cause of the rebellion. When the rebellion was taking place, Aerys Targaryen concocted the Wildfire plot in fear of Robert actually winning. He burned his hand, Carlton Chelstead, when he tried to stop him from doing this. Seeing him burn excited Aerys, and then he assaulted his wife Rhaella, which conceived Daenerys. But with no rebellion, no Wildfire plot, no burning, no assault, no Dragon Queen across the Narrow Sea. And with that being said, Prince Viserys doesn't have to live his life with the trauma of seeing his family die, raising his sister on the streets alone, and giving away his mother's crown, the only thing he had left of her at the time. He can live a better life, hopefully, under his big brother Rhaegar. And he won't get a gold face mask in this timeline either. So if Robert married Lyanna Stark and she stayed loyal to him, then we're looking at a pretty peaceful timeline for everyone for the time being. Though Lyanna and Robert's marriage would be nothing to write home about, I see them being content at the most, for lack of a better word, with no real problems outside of Robert cheating on Lyanna every now and then, once he realizes that this isn't the fairy tale ending that he imagined for himself. Lyanna would be just another dissatisfied woman in Westeros in this timeline. It's unfortunate for her, but in this context, Probably better for everyone else, since she won't start a war that gets a lot of people killed by running off with the Dragon Prince. But that's all I have for today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.